Chapter 151. I've troubled the chief. Heh, it's getting late. Why don't you rest here tonight? I've prepared a special program for you. Calvert chuckled. Another chant rang out as bone arrows filled the air, surging into the midst of the officers and causing them to cry out in pain. Suddenly, numerous skeletal, zombie, and ghouls appeared in the blink of an eye, as well as the howling gargoyles and hate warriors, charging towards the officers. Hide in a tree and wait. When I make the first move, seize the opportunity and attack Clark. Lucky instructed as he crouched on a wall on the side of the street like a gecko, matching the color of the night. Since Clark was about to leave, Warren changed his strategy and decided to make his move on the road. They would definitely pass through a street after leaving Calvert's house. There were all sorts of buildings and a few lush trees around the street. It was a good place to make a move. Although Han Shua hadn't fully mastered the art of the demonic ninth heavens, yet, simple flight wasn't a problem. It was because of this art that Han Shua was able to grow wings and fly out of the encirclement of the soldiers. Suddenly, a series of crackling sounds rang out from the bottom of the carriage. The carriage split into pieces in an instant, with splinters mixed with sand flying everywhere. The milky white sword light burst out 2 meters and blossomed from the broken carriage. The bursting sword light was like a hedgehog covered with spikes, and Lucky was like a hedgehog wrapped in the sword light. No, thank you, Uncle, but there have been a few more strangers in Valen City recently. I have many things to do and won't be staying today. Clark stood up and seemed to want to leave. Uncle Calvert, Lawrence's identity isn't that simple. You must be on your guard. My father will send someone to protect you in secret in 2 days. Clark warned Calvert. Oh my gosh, it's actually an archmage necromancer. Calvert suddenly cried out in surprise and yelled out loudly. Han Shua nodded and didn't say anything else. He leapt into the air and landed on a roof. When he looked down, he discovered that Lucky had miraculously disappeared without a trace. Han Shua stood up and shot a look at Lucky when his ears left the tiles. The two of them left without a sound and quickly moved outwards. There were many houses in the surroundings, but when Han Shua listened attentively, he discovered that there didn't seem to be anyone living in the houses. He didn't know if they'd been arranged to leave beforehand. Han Shua was a bit regretful that he hadn't used his senses to scout the surroundings beforehand. He'd been too focused on killing Clark and hadn't paid attention to some details. After advancing to the true demon realm, Han Shua did indeed feel that his body was more flexible and useful than before. He could change his body into various states through his own adjustments. For example, it was very easy for him to conceal his presence like this. After a while, a carriage drove out from the direction of Calvert's house. The clattering of the carriage was quite ear-piercing in the silent night. The coachman was a sturdy guard. He waved the reins in his hand and spurred the running horses. When the carriage arrived at Lage's hiding place, a figure darted out from a hidden corner like lightning. It was as if he was weightless and stuck to the bottom of the carriage. Lucky's performance in this regard was quite satisfactory. He first crouched on the roof as soon as he entered Calvert's house and took a look at the layout of the entire building. He then pointed out the general purpose of each room to Han Shua, such as where the living room was, the master bedroom, and even the bathroom. He vaguely pointed them out to Han Shua. Just as Han Shua was worrying for Lucky, a figure used a levitation spell and quickly approached from the distance. The moon was covered by a cloud of black mist in the blink of an eye, and the already dim sky darkened in an instant. The figure extended a white bone staff from his wide sleeves as he approached. He waved his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice. Taking a deep breath, Han Shua stood in the distance and looked around. He discovered that there were close to 100 soldiers at Clark's place. These well-trained people were searching for Lucky from room to room. They gave up on the chase after Han Shua and focused all their attention on Lucky. Han Shua was startled as he looked at the necromancer that had appeared in the sky. He was stunned by this powerful necromancy magic. We've been tricked. Retreat immediately. Han Shua suddenly called out lowly from the tree above and quickly jumped down from the lush foliage. At this moment, Han Shua's heart was actually calmer. He looked around coldly and discovered that there were suddenly a few more soldiers on the streets. These people were riding war horses and whizzing in his direction. There were even some who had drawn their longbows and were shooting at him from the roof. From the direction of Calvert's house, a calm and unruffled Clark walked out with a broad, middle-aged knight. Their gazes were fixed on Han Shuo as they spurred their warhorses to charge over. Because Clark might be in the hall, the two didn't dare act rashly. They lifted the roof tiles to observe and stuck their cheeks to the roof, trying to hear what was being said inside. In addition, Han Shuo discovered that the art of the demonic ninth heavens was much more skillful than the levitation spells that mages in this world could use when they reached the Archmage realm. When an Archmage cast the levitation spells, they couldn't compare to the agility and speed of Han Shuo's art of the demonic ninth heavens. Lucky changed into a grayish-brown robe. The color of his robe was the same as the color of the walls of the building. When he slowly walked along the wall, no one would be able to detect anything out of the ordinary even under the bright moonlight. It looked like Lucky had a very detailed understanding of the various styles of buildings. He must have spent a great deal of time and effort studying them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to obtain so much information just by looking at the layout of the building. Han Shuo nimbly dodged the arrows when they came, and then discovered that even more soldiers were approaching. After thinking for a bit, Han Shuo deployed the art of the demonic ninth heavens, and his entire body suddenly flew into the air, shooting out like a hawk. All of this was clearly seen by Han Shuo from afar. When he saw the carriage quickly approach the large tree he was on, Han Shuo took a deep breath and focused his cold eyes, tightening his grip on the demon's lair edge. Lucky's expression was still calm as he looked around and said softly, "Let's split up and escape. We'll pass through the houses nearby." There was no way for Lucky to warn Han Shuo about the timing of his attack in advance. There was no way to teach Han Shuo the timing of his attack in the blink of an eye. Lucky could only let Han Shuo grasp it himself. Under Lucky's gaze, Han Shuo also took out a robe of similar color and put it on. He followed behind Lucky and approached the brightly lit roof of the hall. In the beginning, Han Shuo was quite surprised, thinking that Lucky had succeeded so quickly. When Han Shuo focused his attention on the corpse, he discovered that the person was completely unfamiliar and wasn't Clark at all. Messy footsteps quickly approached from all directions, immediately making Han Shuo realize the severity of the situation. As they slowly approached the hall, Han Shuo's breathing became long and steady, and his heartbeat suddenly slowed to match his breathing. Even the heat emanating from his body changed as he approached the roof of the hall. When they were about to reach the roof, if Han Shuo's entire body wasn't moving, he would have been mistaken for a tile on the roof. When the two flew to Calvert's house, Han Shuo finally recognized the old assassin Lucky's expertise. A qualified assassin would always maintain a low profile before making a move to assassinate the target. Only at the moment of making a move could the other party sense his presence. "Let's do this. Be careful for now. Lawrence seems to have appeared in Valen City. He may come looking for trouble with you." Clark's voice sounded, reminding Calvert to be careful. Lawrence is only the son of the Empire's finance minister. Isn't he just throwing his life away by coming to Valen City to deal with me? Calvert didn't mind as he laughed loudly like a great bell. Lucky had taken a pill, but his body still couldn't reach the level of stealth that Han Shuo had. When they finally reached the roof, Lucky looked incredulously at Han Shuo, very surprised at Han Shuo's extraordinary control over his body. It was only now that Han Shuo discovered that Lucky was also an assassin with the strength of a swordmaster. A milky white light flashed through the air, disappearing in the blink of an eye as if it had never appeared. An intact carriage was instantly smashed into pieces, and the person inside died on the spot with bloody holes all over his body. The coachman in the front ran for his life. Numerous arrows whistled through the air, but Han Shuo used the demon's lair edge to break through them. He'd flown out of the encirclement in the blink of an eye and landed on a large tree in the distance. Chapter 152. Necromancers were rare to begin with, and Archmage-level necromancers were even rarer. Therefore, the appearance of this necromancer immediately caused many gasps of surprise. Han Shuo had just used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to escape from that area when he suddenly discovered this change. He hesitated for a moment and weaved through the surrounding rooftops, retreating back the way he'd come. When this necromancer had appeared, he'd used necromancy summoning to summon many dark creatures from another dimension. The appearance of these dark creatures greatly affected the soldiers chasing after Lucky, especially the enormous hate warriors and the group of gargoyles flying through the air. The enormous and shockingly strong hate warriors could smash a soldier into meat paste with a swing of an enormous metal rod. The agile gargoyles' metal claws whistled through the air and were also a great threat. "Damn it, I'll go kill him!" Clark roared angrily as he whipped the reins and the warhorse beneath him charged forward. A long spear appeared in his hand as he charged in the direction of the necromancer. Under the ferocious gallop of the warhorse and the charge of the shining spear, the skeletal and zombie warriors in the way were unable to obstruct him at all. Knights could increase their own strength by a level with the charging force of their warhorse. Therefore, the scattered dark creatures were unable to stop Clark at all when he and his warhorse charged forward as one. At this time, because the Archmage-level necromancer had appeared, the surrounding soldiers were busy dealing with the summoned creatures and were unable to provide any effective assistance to Clark. Adept Knight Calvert remained where he was, directing the movements of the soldiers. When these well-trained soldiers had calmed down and formed teams to deal with the dark creatures, the rows of skeletal and zombie warriors were the first to fall. Although this Archmage-level necromancer had enormous mental strength, the number of dark creatures he could summon couldn't compare to the number of soldiers here. In particular, some of the ghouls and skeletal warriors were of limited use and were often destroyed by a single thrust from the Griffin Legion soldiers. However, the enormous hate warriors and the gargoyles howling in the darkness were still quite ferocious. They'd killed quite a few soldiers in a short while. It was a pity that there were only 5 hate warriors and 6 or 7 gargoyles. Under the volley of arrows from the archers, a few gargoyles were hit. Then each hate warrior was surrounded by 10 or so Griffin Legion soldiers. A low groan sounded from the necromancer's mouth as 2 of the fallen hate warriors suddenly exploded. The appearance of the 2 corpse explosion spells instantly caused a dozen or so Griffin Legion soldiers to die with ghastly screams. By the time the necromancer was about to continue chanting another spell, Clark had already rushed in front of him on his warhorse. The silver spear in his hand suddenly lit up with a milky white sword light. Using the momentum of his warhorse, Clark flew up with his spear, stabbing towards the necromancer who was floating in the air with the levitation spell like lightning. Enormous white bones suddenly appeared in midair and formed a white bone shield with miraculous speed. The white bone shield was 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, completely blocking the necromancer within. The white bones sparkled with a wondrous light and didn't leave the slightest gap when assembled. Some of the sharp bone fragments formed barbs in front of the shield, looking quite peculiar. With a crack, Clark's attack, infused with his ferocious momentum, suddenly smashed onto the white bone shield. Even such a high-level white bone shield was accompanied by cracking sounds as it shattered under Clark's wave of violent attacks. Bone powder flew everywhere where the spear pierced through the smooth and large white bones. With a muffled groan, the necromancer drifted back like a ghost. It looked like he'd realized that Clark wasn't easy to deal with and planned on putting some distance between them first. Clark's body landed on a roof after his charge ended. He sheathed his spear and swapped it for a long sword. He quickly weaved through the roofs and fixed his eyes on the necromancer as he chased after him. Another dark mist was released and the body of the necromancer who just retreated flashed through the mist, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. 3 bone spears pierced through the air at the same time, aiming straight for Clark. Clark was finally able to determine the necromancer's location after the 3 bone spears appeared. At the same time, the sharp-eyed Han Shuo saw a protruding stone-like object move slightly on the roof Clark was on. This made Han Shuo's heart skip a beat as his body abruptly stopped and he hid on another roof. However, the Demon's Lair edge had already silently approached Clark according to his thoughts. Snorting coldly, Clark didn't stop his charge, but suddenly changed directions midway. The long sword in his hand suddenly flickered and broke the bone spear that he hadn't been able to dodge. At this moment, Clark's figure finally neared the protruding stone-like object. The originally motionless object suddenly shot out a ray of cold light, and then Lucky's body, which was covered by a grayish-brown robe, appeared at the same time. Clark hadn't anticipated such a sudden attack when he'd just broken through the necromancer's bone spear. He'd only gathered half of his fighting aura when he immediately raised his sword to block the attack. The sound of metal clashing resounded through the night sky as Clark's body was involuntarily flung down from the roof. In the middle of Clark's descent, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded. A thin and long purple flame appeared out of thin air and bombarded Clark's lower back. The purple flame entered Clark's lower back and disappeared into his body in an instant. A ghastly howl suddenly sounded from Clark's mouth. When Clark's body landed on the ground, his entire body suddenly ignited with purple flames. Han Shua's figure bizarrely flew in front of Clark and looked coldly at Clark, who was being burned by the purple flames. With a mental summon, the demon's lair edge broke out of Clark's chest and landed in Han Shua's palm without a single drop of blood. It's you? Clark, whose internal organs had all been invaded by the cold and his body had also been rapidly damaged by the demon's lair edge, spat out these words with difficulty when he saw Han Shua reveal himself and pull off his mask. His teeth chattered and his face was full of disbelief. That's right, it's me. You've tried to kill me twice and failed, but I only need one chance to kill you. Han Shua said callously as he waved his right hand and circulated the mystical glacial spellfire. A red flame landed on Clark's body. Clark, who had already been invaded by the cold and was about to die, was burned again by the spellfire and turned into a puddle of blood in an instant. The speed of the spellfire was unbelievable. 3 bone spears appeared out of thin air and aimed straight at Han Shua. The whistling sound startled Han Shua. He leapt up and slashed with the demon's lair edge in his hand, cutting a bone spear in half. Han Shua yelled at Lucky in the distance, "Damn it, why is he attacking me as well? I don't know him." Lucky replied as he dodged the attack with lightning speed. This was because the necromancer had also attacked Lucky. So it wasn't one of his own. Han Shua was startled and abruptly dodged. When the necromancer saw Han Shua escape, he actually began to tangle with Han Shua and relentlessly chased after Han Shua. This necromancer's appearance was a bit strange, and he wasn't on Lawrence's side. This made Han Shua feel quite puzzled and he didn't know which side the necromancer belonged to. Now that Clark was dead, Han Shua saw that Lucky had concealed his figure and was heading in Calvert's direction. It looked like he was planning on finishing off Calvert as well. Han Shua didn't know anything about his counterpart and didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw that his counterpart had set his sights on him. He didn't plan on tangling with the necromancer any longer and fled outside as fast as he could. When Han Shua was a few hundred meters away from Calvert's house, Han Shua discovered Lawrence's carriage with his astonishing eyesight. Han Shua was overjoyed and quickly made his way to Lawrence's carriage. The necromancer's counterpart that was chasing Han Shua summoned a few gargoyles to follow Han Shua. Only when Han Shua appeared next to Lawrence's carriage did the necromancer and the gargoyles suddenly retreat. "Brian, what's going on? Why didn't you send out any signals? But it's a mess over there again." Lawrence immediately poked his head out of the carriage when he saw Han Shua appear and asked anxiously to Han Shua, "Don't mention it, tonight's events are a bit strange. Lucky and I don't know what's going on. We were mysteriously discovered and were almost caught by Clark. Then, an archmage necromancer suddenly appeared and attacked Clark and the others after he appeared. In the end, he attacked us as well. I really don't know what's going on." Han Shua complained. "Then how's Uncle Lucky? Is Clark dead?" Lawrence asked again. Mr. Lucky snuck towards Calvert and seemed to be planning on finishing him off. Clark's done for, you don't have to worry." Han Shua responded. Lawrence couldn't disguise the ecstasy on his face as he laughed heartily. "Well done, well done. Valen City is about to descend into chaos." Chapter 153. Lawrence had a crazed expression on his face as he spoke, as if he wished for the world to be in chaos. This made Han Shua feel quite astonished. "Brian, I'll be staying in Valen City for now. You can find me in the house you just came from if you need anything." Right, How do I contact you? Lawrence was in a good mood as he turned his head to look at Han Shuo. Musing for a moment, Han Shuo gave Lawrence the address of the hotel Emily was staying in and then quickly left, not caring about what happened afterwards. The hotel Emily was staying in wasn't a dark mantle stronghold, so Han Shuo wasn't afraid that Lawrence would find her. As Han Shuo was making his way back to the dark mantle stronghold, the sound of iron hooves rang out from Calvert's direction. It looked like Clark's death had indeed greatly affected the entirety of Valen City. Han Shuo didn't linger in this direction at this moment, nor did he care about whether Calvert had been assassinated by Lucky. He concealed his tracks and quickly made his way back to the Dark Mantle stronghold. Han Shuo easily found Emily after arriving at the Dark Mantle stronghold in Valen City. Waving her hands, Emily had Chester withdraw and then said to Han Shuo with a grave expression, "I know Lawrence's identity." She was indeed worthy of being a senior executive of the Dark Mantle. Han Shuo looked joyfully at Emily and asked in high spirits, "That's great. Just what is that kid's background? His status seems to be quite high." "Oh, if you interact with him in the future, pay attention to what you say and how you address him. This person may have a great influence on you." Emily glared unhappily at Han Shuo and then chanted a dark magic spell in a low voice. A boundary suddenly formed in the room and enveloped Han Shuo and Emily within. With this boundary, the members outside won't be able to hear what I'm going to say next, Emily said gravely. Han Shuo was quite surprised to see Emily act so cautiously and hurriedly asked, "All right, don't keep me in suspense. Just what is Lawrence's identity?" Taking a deep breath, Emily sighed and said in a low voice, "He should be His Royal Highness the Third Prince." Startled, Han Shuo looked at Emily with a bit of disbelief. He then shook his head and said with a smile, "You're not joking, are you? Every citizen of the Lancelot Empire knows very well that His Majesty only has 2 sons. How could there be a third prince? In addition, everyone knows that Lawrence is the son of the finance minister of the Empire. How could he be the third prince?" "I'm telling the truth." Emily couldn't help but reach out and pinch Han Shuo when she saw that Han Shuo didn't quite believe her. She then explained, "This matter is a scandal in the royal family. The finance minister, Evie, has some problems in that area and has married a beautiful wife, Alice. He can only look at her and not touch her. Evie has a very good relationship with His Majesty and met Evie's wife, Alice, at a private banquet that Evie held. His Majesty was awed by Alice's beauty, and because Evie was impotent and His Majesty deliberately took action, the two ended up together. This matter was discovered by Evie because Alice was pregnant. Afterwards, His Majesty personally showed up and explained the matter to Evie. What was done could not be undone. Add to that the fact that His Majesty was the ruler of the nation, Evie knew that he was impotent and couldn't say anything to Alice, so he tacitly agreed to the matter. However, because the impact of this matter was too bad, it had been concealed by both sides. Some of the nobles in the upper echelons of the empire were aware of it, but no one dared to talk about it. Lawrence was the son of His Majesty and Alice. Ever since Lawrence was born, his ambitious mother, Alice, had carefully raised him, making him study the ways of governing the country and teaching him the knowledge he needed to know. Lawrence had known his identity since he was young, but his talents were extraordinary and his conduct was brilliant. He even had a very good relationship with his adoptive father, Evie. It was a pity that because of his identity as an illegitimate child, Lawrence couldn't enter the royal family. This made His Majesty feel very guilty and doted on Lawrence. He would often meet with Lawrence alone to express his concern. It was said that His Majesty was very satisfied with Lawrence. As for the other 2 princes, one was brave and had the potential to become a great general, while the other was extraordinarily intelligent but indecisive. It seemed that neither of them were suitable candidates to manage the affairs of the country. Because His Majesty's body was growing weaker and weaker, and he himself felt that he didn't have much time left, His Majesty had been the closest to Lawrence during this period of time. According to the outside rumors, His Majesty had the intention of revealing Lawrence's identity and supporting Lawrence to become the next king. However, the other 2 princes' mother's side was extremely powerful within the empire. If His Majesty acted rashly, even he wouldn't be able to grasp the situation. That was why he hadn't acted yet. As His Majesty's body grew weaker and weaker, a storm was gradually brewing within the empire. That old fox Candide told you not to get too close to Lawrence because he was worried that Lawrence's identity would affect your future. These words from Emily's mouth greatly shocked Han Shuo. Han Shuo had never thought that Lawrence would actually have such a lofty identity. If the situation developed smoothly, it was entirely possible that Lawrence would become the next king of the empire, holding all the power within the Lancelot Empire and dictating the life and death of any person. Seeing Han Shuo take a deep breath and his eyes continuously twinkle, Emily understood that her words had greatly affected Han Shuo. Seeing that Han Shuo was deep in thought, Emily didn't open her mouth to disturb Han Shuo. She only stood there and looked at Han Shuo, waiting for Han Shuo to sort out his own thoughts. After a while, Han Shuo nodded and smiled at Emily. "All right, I understand. Don't worry, I know how to handle my relationship with Lawrence. Our dark mantle has never interfered with complicated internal affairs of the royal family. We only listen to His Majesty's orders. Before the situation is clear and His Majesty has given a definite indication, we normally won't get involved. Candide, that old fox, was able to vaguely warn you after your first mission. This means that he thinks very highly of you. He has good intentions towards you. The more you know about these matters, the more disadvantageous it will be for you. It's because I understand you too well and know of your strength and ambitions that I'm telling you such confidential matters. However, it's still up to you to decide how to grasp and decide." Emily looked at Han Shuo and explained, "I know that you're doing this for my own good. Hehe, I know what to do. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I've already killed Clark. Valen City should be in chaos right now." Han Shuo smiled faintly at Emily. It was Emily's turn to be shocked when she heard these words. She looked incredulously at Han Shuo and asked with great surprise, What did you say? You said you killed Clark?" Nodding, Han Shuo said with certainty, "Correct, I did kill Clark, but someone helped me in the middle. In addition, I only managed to do it because of a sneak attack. Don't be too surprised." Exhaling lightly, Emily was still quite astonished. She shook her head. "We've investigated Clark's strength. He's absolutely an Earth Knight. He reached the strength of an Earth Knight at such a young age, and his potential is extraordinary. Who would have thought that you would ambush him and kill him like this? It looks like you're hiding a lot of things from me." "No, I'm really not hiding anything from you. Actually, an Archmage necromancer appeared along the way and I, a fellow necromancer, helped us deal with Clark. We received great help from his strength, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to succeed at all." Han Shuo smiled wryly and briefly recounted what had happened to Emily. When Han Shuo had finished, Emily's expression became quite grave. She murmured, "Necromancers are already very rare, and Archmage necromancers are even rarer. I really don't know which faction this necromancer belongs to. I'll need you to investigate this," Han Shuo said with a smile. Come with me. We'll go find something." Emily thought for a moment and put on a fur coat from the side, asking Han Shuo to walk out with her. "What do we need to do?" Han Shuo walked up to Emily and gently tidied up the corners of Emily's clothes. Smiling charmingly at Han Shuo, Emily laughed naughtily like a little girl about to do something naughty. "Clark just died. Valen City must be in a state of chaos right now. The Griffin Legion must be in a frenzy right now, searching the entire city for traces of you. What we need to do is take advantage of the chaos and make things even more chaotic." "Hehe, that's great. I've discovered that I like to do bad things. Perhaps I was a murderer and arsonist in my past life." Han Shuo smiled faintly. "You're also a very bad bastard in this life." Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shuo and removed the boundary, walking out with Han Shuo. Chapter 154. In the span of a few months, of Bob Asher's two sons, one had mysteriously disappeared, and the other had been killed on the streets. This was too much of a blow to him. Clark was his most valued son, the one he'd placed the most hope on. Now that he'd been killed in Valen City, he'd gone completely insane. That night in Valen City was destined to be a time of chaos. All of the Griffin Legion soldiers had been gathered and were going from house to house, searching for suspicious characters. Due to the chief's rage, the ordinary soldiers of the Griffin Legion were also in a bad temper. All unfamiliar merchants and adventurers who didn't cooperate in the slightest might face a vicious beating. The sound of hooves thundered through the streets, waking up the people who were sleeping in the middle of the night. Even the symbol of the Griffin Legion, a Griffin Legion, was hovering in the night sky above Valen City, making everyone feel as if they were facing a great enemy. They even thought that the Kasi Empire had invaded in the middle of the night. The Griffins were like black dots in the sky, their strange cries deafening to the ears. They flew from the west to the south, and then from the south to the north. Whenever they saw any strange movements below, they would land and move with the soldiers on the ground. So these are griffins. They look quite large. Han Shuo stood behind a large tree on a street near Bob Asher's slave shop, murmuring to himself as he watched a pair of griffins fly past. Indeed, griffins are a very ferocious flying unit. A single griffin has the ability to tear apart ordinary magical creatures. This Griffin Legion is a very important reason why His Majesty thinks so highly of old Bob and doesn't dare to act rashly despite knowing that he has intentions of rebelling. Emily exhaled lightly and explained to Han Shuo, shivering a bit. It was a cold winter night, and some of the puddles on the streets had already formed thick blocks of ice. The ice needles hanging from the houses glinted coldly under the moonlight. As the cold wind blew, it was only natural that a mage like Emily would feel cold. Sucking in a breath of cold air, Han Shuo held Emily's tender little hand with his right hand and circulated his demonic yuan. Han Shuo's right hand was like a small stove, bringing warmth to Emily. You're a necromancer, and at the same time, you've also trained in a special martial technique. But why are you still able to use fire magic? Moreover, you're using it so skillfully, as if you can adjust the temperature according to your will. How are you able to do it? Emily's charming eyes sparkled as she stared at Han Shuo, rebuking Han Shuo. Actually, this is one of the martial techniques that I practice. Don't be so surprised. Han Shuo shrugged his shoulders and explained to Emily honestly. It was a pity that Emily didn't believe Han Shuo's explanation in the slightest, but Emily didn't pursue the matter. She smiled faintly. All right, I'll discover all your secrets one day. Your mysteriousness is a kind of poison to me. I've discovered that the more I want to know everything about you, the more mysterious you become. Don't be love-struck. Let's go, let's go. Han Shuo reached out with a smile and slapped Emily's round butt, urging Emily to walk faster. The two of them didn't bring Chester with them this time. When they arrived at the slave shop where Lisa had been auctioned off last time, Han Shuo released a dark mist magic and shrouded the surrounding walls in an even darker environment. Heh, your grasp of necromancy magic isn't bad now. Emily laughed lowly. As an archmage, she used the levitation spell and slowly rose into the air, landing on a 5-meter-tall wall. She spoke again. I'll wrap the rope inside, you can use it to climb over. Why go to so much trouble? Han Shuo laughed lowly and his body abruptly shot through the air. His speed was faster and steadier than Emily's levitation spell, and he landed beside Emily in the blink of an eye. Her body suddenly froze in place and Emily looked at Han Shuo as if she'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. Her beautiful eyes sparkled and she threw herself into Han Shuo's arms, using all her strength to pound Han Shuo's chest. She cursed with a mixture of anger and joy. You annoying bastard, you've clearly reached the archmage level long ago and you've been lying to me. I'll fight it out with you, you bastard, you bastard. When Han Shuo heard the strange sounds coming from afar, he didn't dare stay at a high place in case he attracted the attention of bystanders. He abruptly grabbed Emily and flew down, hiding in a corner of the slave trading house. He then grabbed Emily's little hand and explained with a rueful smile, I didn't lie to you. This flying method is similar to the levitation spell and is one of the martial arts techniques I've trained in. It has nothing to do with magic. Think carefully, did you feel any magical pulses from my body just now? Emily started when she heard Han Shuo's words and her long eyelashes fluttered in confusion. She then looked at Han Shuo in shock and asked incredulously, "Just what kind of martial arts technique are you training in?" According to my understanding, even the strongest swordsman or sacred knight can only use fighting aura to fly into the air for a short period of time. That kind of martial arts technique can't even be called a flying technique. How can you do it? I've said before that the martial arts technique I train in is a bit more wondrous. It's hard for me to explain it to you. Han Shuo indeed couldn't say much about the training of magical arts and could only explain it to Emily this way. All right. I knew I wouldn't be able to get anything out of you. Let's go. Let's take advantage of the chaos in Valen City and see if we can get anything useful from this slave trading house. Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shuo in rebuke and tugged on Han Shuo's arm as they walked the familiar path towards the slave trading house. Emily must have carefully investigated this slave trading house beforehand and was very familiar with the buildings here. Her body floated in midair as she walked and didn't make a single sound. A layer of black magic as thin as a cicada's wings formed around her body, concealing the condition of her body. Han Shuo had long since become familiar with this kind of shady business. Not only did he not make a single sound, but he also used his extraordinary senses to continuously point the way for Emily, allowing the two to avoid the many guards patrolling along the way. After a while, the two passed through the two buildings of the auction house they'd passed last time and headed deeper into the back 3 buildings. This slave trading house usually has soldiers from the Griffin Legion stationed here. It'll be very difficult for us to leave once we've been discovered. However, because of Clark's death today, the soldiers inside will definitely be mobilized to conduct a manhunt for all of Valen City. This is the best opportunity for us, Emily explained to Han Shuo as they walked. Han Shuo became serious once they got down to business. He listened to Emily's words as he silently observed the surroundings. At this moment, an extremely odd smell surged into Han Shuo's nostrils. This smell was mixed with the smell of blood, and it was a bit pungent as Han Shuo slowly took in the air. Sniffing, Han Shuo reached out a hand to pull Emily and said lowly, "There's the smell of blood. Something doesn't seem right here either." "I don't think so." Emily sniffed hard and spoke with surprise. She thought for a moment and seemed to remember Han Shuo's miracles. She said, "See if you can find the direction the smell of blood is coming from." Nodding, Han Shuo said lowly, "Follow me." Grabbing Emily's little hand, Han Shuo used his nose to search for the direction of the smell of blood. He passed 2 buildings on the side and arrived next to a pond. There was a fake mountain next to the pond with several dark caves within. Han Shuo's ears and nose were put to good use as he led Emily into one of the caves. A creaking sound suddenly rang out as the originally thick stone wall suddenly split apart. A terrified Imperial guard rushed out from within, his body covered in blood. He hadn't even taken a few steps when a bone spear suddenly appeared out of thin air and pierced through the Imperial guard's back. 2 zombie warriors then walked out and dragged the Imperial guard's corpse inside. This scene was seen clearly by Han Shuo and Emily, who had just entered and taken the opportunity to hide on the side. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment and suddenly said, "Perhaps the necromancer I saw today is inside right now." This is highly possible, but the owner of this slave shop is Bob Asher, and that necromancer is also one of Clark's killers. Why would he appear here? Emily was a bit puzzled as she conversed with Han Shuo in a low voice. The most dangerous place is the safest place. The entire city is on high alert right now, and this slave shop is Bob Asher's property. Large amounts of soldiers have been deployed, so no one would have thought that he'd appear here. One of the guards was killed just now, which means that this necromancer isn't a customer here. It's very likely that he's here to hide. Han Shuo thought for a moment and opened his mouth to speak slowly. What you say makes a lot of sense. Should we take a look then? Emily spoke approvingly and asked Han Shuo for his opinion. Of course, I'm also quite curious about this necromancer. If I were to face him alone, I'd probably have no choice but to run, but now that you're here, we don't need to fear him. Han Shuo opened his mouth to speak and paused. Han Shuo listened attentively to the movements inside and said after a while, "All right, the footsteps of the zombie warriors have faded away. Let's go take a look." Chapter 155. The two saw corpses littering the ground as soon as they entered the cave. A rough estimate estimated that there were at least a few dozen bodies. Judging from the clothing on their bodies, there were guards from the slave shop, nobles who had come to choose their slaves, and even slaves who had been imprisoned in cages. Torches burned on the surrounding walls, illuminating the area. This place was most likely used to imprison slaves. There were many iron bars in the surroundings, and there were also some instruments of torture in the middle. It looked like they were used to discipline disobedient slaves. A high platform had been built with black stones in the center, and a corpse was tied to several pillars. There was a square groove about 3 meters wide in the center of the platform, and a strong stench of blood emanated from it. More than 10 zombie warriors were summoned and lifted the corpses on the ground, throwing them one by one into the pool of blood in the center of the platform. When the intact corpses fell into the pool of blood, they sank into it with a splash. The pool of blood then bubbled with a gurgling sound, calming down after a while as the water level in the pool rose a few notches. As more and more corpses were thrown into the pool of blood, more and more blood appeared in the pool, almost filling it to the brim. In the corner of the platform, the necromancer that Han Shuo had seen last time was holding a white bone staff and revealing his appearance. His body was emaciated, and he was looking expressionlessly at the pool of blood. No signs of life could be seen in his grayish-brown eyes. Han Shuo and Selena immediately retreated to a corner when they entered, only using the cracks in the corners to observe everything. Emily set up a soundproof boundary around the two and immediately said in a low voice, "It looks like this necromancer is setting up some sort of altar. I wonder what he's planning on doing?" Shaking his head, Han Shuo's expression was grave as he said lowly, "I don't know if it's because I've grasped too little necromancy magic, but I don't know anything about this altar that the necromancer is setting up. It looks like an archmage necromancer has grasped many powerful necromancy spells indeed." As Han Shuo and Emily spoke in low voices, the necromancer waved the white bone staff in his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice. The blood in the pool of blood on the altar suddenly began to swirl, and the corpses that had been tied to the pillars were instantly stripped of their flesh and blood, becoming a few sets of eerie white skeletons. Another spell of necromancy was chanted, and the souls on the ground that hadn't yet dispersed seemed to materialize as they transformed into clouds of grayish-brown smoke, surging into the pool of blood in the center of the altar. The blood in the blood pool formed a whirlpool, and the bones of the corpses that had just sunk to the bottom were revealed one by one. Then, these white bones slowly pieced together, gradually forming a three-eyed evil god with 8 horns on its head and a barbed tail at its waist. This three-eyed evil god was formed from white bones. Its 3 eyes were red, yellow, and blue, like triangles embedded on its forehead. When it was still forming, a vast and enormous evil presence spread from its body, filling the entire area with its evil presence. It was a kind of ruthless, murderous, and extremely bloodthirsty evil. Even from a great distance, Han Shuo felt a chill in his heart. His eyes abruptly locked onto the three-eyed evil god, not leaving it for even a second as he focused all of his attention on all of its movements. Oh my gosh, he's connected to the three-eyed evil god, Ansidezi, through the altar. Emily groaned in disbelief, her beautiful eyes filled with shock. Gods were powerful beings of legend, and they had the ability to penetrate the heavens and the earth. However, they were bound by the laws of the plane and couldn't reveal their true forms in this world. However, through some rituals and mediums, some people in this world could actually use profound secret techniques to communicate with the gods. All this time, Han Shuo had thought that this kind of unproven theory was very absurd and that it was something that couldn't possibly exist. But now that the truth was right in front of him, Han Shuo had no choice but to believe it. Seeing that they were separated by who knew how many planes of existence, the three-eyed evil god, Ansidezi, had used this necromancer's ritual to descend his consciousness onto the white skeleton. Han Shuo stood there in a daze, his thoughts a mess. A series of mysterious and ancient sounds came from the mouth of the three-eyed evil god. Han Shuo and Emily were both baffled and didn't know what this string of sounds meant. However, the skinny necromancer seemed to be able to communicate directly with him. The necromancer was prostrating on the ground, his head buried deep in his chest as he kowtowed. He suddenly lifted his head with a look of fear and trepidation, and then quickly chanted an incantation. The Life Scout necromancy magic was released, and it suddenly floated in all directions. Not good. When Han Shuo saw this magic appear, he immediately knew that he was in trouble. He suddenly gave a low cry and planned to pull Emily away from this place. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. The Life Scout magic spread out in all directions, and suddenly lit up when it neared where Han Shuo and Emily were. The face of the kneeling necromancer immediately darkened and he suddenly waved his white bone staff. The dozen or so zombie warriors that had stopped in the surroundings suddenly walked towards Han Shuo and Emily. "We've been exposed, we have to leave immediately," Emily shouted and suddenly retreated, planning to take Han Shuo and leave this place. At this moment, the sharp-eyed Han Shuo saw that because of the necromancer's distraction, the body of the three-eyed evil god, Ansidezi, that had just been formed from white bones, suddenly collapsed into the blood pool on the altar. It looked like the necromancer couldn't be distracted for even a moment in order to use the mysterious magic to use the blood and bones in the blood pool to communicate with the three-eyed evil god Ansidezi. If the necromancer was distracted to deal with Han Shuo and Emily, then Ansidezi, who had crossed who knew how many planes of existence to descend upon this place with his consciousness, wouldn't be able to use the blood and bones to appear. The three-eyed evil god Ansidezi can't help him. The two of us don't need to be afraid of him. Han Shuo's body paused and he stopped at the entrance of the cave. He even grabbed Emily's retreating body with a backhand grip. Emily's beautiful eyes focused on the altar as soon as she heard Han Shuo's words. She also discovered that the three-eyed evil god had disappeared into the blood pool. She immediately calmed down and shouted, "Who are you to dare use such an evil ceremony to summon the three-eyed evil god Ansidezi in Valen City? The two of you shouldn't have barged in, otherwise I wouldn't have killed you." The skinny necromancer used a levitation spell to fly towards Han Shuo and Emily after saying these words in a hoarse voice. He waved the white bone staff in his hand and released a high-level necromancy spell, Chains of the Grudge Spirits. Dozens of grudge spirits tangled together and formed a long metal chain that moved towards Han Shuo and Emily. The dozen or so zombie warriors also raised their wooden clubs and arrived in front of Han Shuo and Emily, immediately attacking Han Shuo and Emily. Emily snorted delicately and took out her magic staff. She chanted a dark magic spell, and a pitch-black death scythe suddenly took shape in the air. She pointed her magic staff at it and it slashed towards the zombie warriors. The zombie warriors' bodies were as fragile as paper under the death scythe's slashes. They were torn apart in an instant, and not a single one was able to get close to Han Shuo and Emily. As the chains of the grudge spirits wrapped around them, Han Shuo's Demon's Lair Edge suddenly whistled as he activated the mystical glacial spellfire, causing the Demon's Lair Edge to explode with blinding red light. The temperature of the entire space suddenly soared as the red spellfire enveloped the Demon's Lair Edge and burned fiercely, rapidly descending towards the chains of the grudge spirits. The chains of the grudge spirits, formed by dozens of grudge spirits, opened their mouths and screamed in terror under the scorching temperature of the Demon's Lair Edge's red world spellfire. When the Demon's Lair Edge whistled into the chains of the grudge spirits, the chains of the grudge spirits made squeaking sounds and gray smoke rose from it. Dozens of grudge spirits screamed as their souls were destroyed. 3 bone spears suddenly formed and abruptly pierced towards Han Shuo and Emily. Han Shuo used his mind to control the Demon's Lair Edge to block the 2 bone spears flying towards Emily. He also chanted a necromancy spell in a low voice and a bone spear pierced through the air, accurately colliding with the other bone spear that was attacking him. "Kid, you're also a necromancer." The skinny necromancer suddenly exclaimed in surprise and looked at Han Shuo with great surprise. "Heh, indeed, indeed. We even joined hands to kill Clark when we were at Calvert's place just now. This is the second time we've met tonight." Han Shuo looked at the necromancer with a calm expression and smiled faintly. Last time at Calvert's house, Han Shuo had covered his face at first and had only taken off his mask when he killed Clark. When the necromancer had attacked Han Shuo, the two had been quite a distance apart. Because it had been the middle of the night, the necromancer hadn't clearly seen Han Shuo's face. It was obvious that Han Shuo hadn't recognized him this time. "So it's you!" The necromancer exclaimed lowly and quickly floated towards Han Shuo again. He said darkly, "We're both necromancers, let me see if you've understood the mysteries of necromancy." The necromancer attacked again after he'd finished speaking, looking like he wanted to kill off Han Shuo first. Chapter 156. I've only just started and was just about to ask for your guidance. Han Shuo wasn't afraid of him. There was also the dark archmage, Emily, by his side. With the two of them fighting him, they definitely wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Thus, when the necromancer floated over, Han Shuo didn't seem nervous at all. The necromancer's figure was as elusive as a ghost, constantly changing directions as he neared Han Shuo and Emily. When he was only 10 meters away from the two, the archmage suddenly waved his white bone staff and chanted a necromancy incantation in a low voice. An evil knight with dark brown skin and a body covered in black metal armor was over 3 meters tall and was riding a howling beast that was even more robust than a wild rhinoceros. Its body was covered in brown scales, and it raised a spiked club that was as thick as a person. It urged the howling beast beneath it to charge viciously towards Han Shuo and Emily. Evil knights were dark creatures of a higher level than hate knights. Only archmage necromancers could summon them. They came from the dark abyss of another dimension, and the black metal armor on their bodies had excellent physical defense. Their ferocious strength combined with the howling beast's charge was a nightmare for anyone. As soon as the evil knight appeared, he urged the howling beast to charge at Han Shuo and Emily, raising his spiked club high above his head and smashing it down like an iron pillar. When Emily saw the evil knight appear, she immediately retreated without saying a word. She chanted a dark magic incantation in a low voice, and the enormous Grim Reaper's scythe, which had yet to disappear, once again slashed at the evil knight under Emily's control. After summoning the evil knight, the necromancer didn't take another step forward. Instead, he quickly dodged to the back, summoning a group of gargoyles to attack Han Shuo as he continued to fire bone spears in all directions. Compared to the fights between the students of the academy, this necromancer was obviously a veteran of 100 battles. He had a very accurate grasp of the timing of the battle. He had drifted towards Han Shuo's group in order to summon the evil knight in front of them. He wanted to charge at them at close range so that they wouldn't have much of a chance to defend themselves. The Demon's Lair edge followed Han Shuo's will and once again spiraled out, bringing with it the fiery red spell flames, shooting towards the group of attacking gargoyles. Han Shuo chanted a bone shield spell and abruptly placed it in front of him, blocking the bone spear from piercing through. After blocking 2 attacks from the bone spears, the bone shield ran out of magic power and cracked. At this moment, Han Shuo's mental strength quickly condensed and circulated, suddenly summoning the little skull. He even used his consciousness to tell the little skull to deal with the evil knight. The evil knight riding the howling beast was an extremely high-level dark creature. When faced with the Grim Reaper scythe formed by Emily's dark magic, he very nimbly used the spiked mace in his hands to defend himself. The spiked mace that had appeared with him in this plane was extremely sturdy and didn't break at all when it collided with the Grim Reaper scythe formed by Emily's magic. "Oh, do you only know how to summon skeletal warriors?" The necromancer was very confused when he saw that Han Shuo had only summoned a strange little skull warrior after quickly chanting a spell. Han Shuo didn't reply with a calm smile on his face. He only used his consciousness to instruct the little skull to attack the evil knight. The 2 leg bones suddenly shot out, and the 7 bone spurs on the little skull's back swayed as he actually flew into the air. The bone dagger that he had been holding tightly was the first to shoot out, quickly stabbing towards the evil knight's back like a bolt of lightning. The evil knight that was facing the Grim Reaper scythe seemed to be a bit disdainful. He only shook his shoulders slightly, and black iron armor covered his back. The necromancer had a mocking smile on his face as he watched the little skull's attack. He wasn't worried about the evil knight that he had summoned at all. Just as the little skull's bone dagger was about to land on the evil knight's back, the bone dagger magically froze in the air for a moment. Then, it suddenly changed direction and stabbed into the evil knight's exposed neck with a whoosh. The evil knight that was facing the Grim Reaper side's attack suddenly let out a series of strange, mournful cries as he waved the huge wolf-tooth club in his hands wildly. With a pew sound, the scythe that Emily had condensed passed through the wolf-tooth club's bombardment and chopped down on the howling beast beneath the evil knight. The howling beast's head was directly chopped off, and sparks of light shone from its head. At the same time, the little skull that had flown over had already landed in front of the evil knight. The 7 bone spurs on his back instantly danced as if he was using the chaotic cloak technique. The 7 bone spurs fiercely stabbed at the evil knight's body that wasn't covered in black iron armor. The little skull also pulled out the bone dagger that had been stuck in the evil knight's neck. He held it in his hand and continuously stabbed it into the evil knight's body. The originally shiny black iron armor of the evil knight suddenly underwent a huge change along with the howling beast's loud roar. The black iron armor suddenly rusted, and the originally thick and lustrous body of the evil knight turned to dust as if it had been weathered away. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared without a trace. Even the howling beast he was riding had turned to ashes like him. This was a sign that all traces of life had been completely erased. After the evil knight had disappeared, Emily let out a light breath and calmed her tightly clenched heart. The Grim Reaper's scythe had also disappeared along with it. The one that remained in place was still the little skull holding the bone dagger. Little Skull waved the bone dagger a bit, and the 7 bone spurs that had been scattered on the ground flew back to his back. At this time, the disdain on the necromancer's face had long since disappeared without a trace. He looked at Little Skull in disbelief and cried out in shock. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Not even 100 skeletal warriors could harm an evil knight. This goes against the common sense of necromancy. A calm smile still hung on his face as Han Shuo said very casually, "Nothing is impossible. Although I don't grasp as much necromancy as you, I don't think there's anything that I can't understand." The bone dagger-wielding little skeleton's leg trembled as he gave the order. He'd already locked onto the necromancer and quickly flew towards the necromancer. He jumped in fright and then chuckled oddly, "Good, very good. Then let me see just what secrets you have." A necromancy incantation came out of his mouth and he quickly approached Han Shuo. Just as he was about to draw close to the little skull, the necromancer suddenly flew high into the air and threw out the white bone staff in his hand, suddenly covering Han Shuo's head. In the blink of an eye, an enormous amount of evil mental strength surged into Han Shuo's mind through the white bone staff. Like a magnet, it attempted to take over Han Shuo's memories for itself. A proud smile appeared on the necromancer's face as he yelled darkly at the panicking Emily, "Don't act blindly without thinking. I've already established a connection with his soul. If I suddenly die, his soul will scatter as well and he'll become an idiot." Emily was stunned when she heard these words. She then looked anxiously at Han Shuo. She discovered that Han Shuo's expression had become absent-minded in just an instant. His eyes were unfocused as he stood there, as if he were a statue or a stone person. Even the little skull, who just received Han Shuo's order to attack the necromancer, suddenly froze in place. He raised his bone dagger and looked around blankly, as if waiting for Han Shuo to give him an order. "Ah, this is a necromancy spell I've recently grasped called Soul Erosion. Using this necromancy spell, I can take over a person's soul as my own. After eroding their soul, I can obtain all their secrets. In this process, I'm connected to the target's soul. If I suddenly die, the target won't be able to escape either." When the necromancer saw that the evil power of the white bone staff had invaded Han Shuo's mind, he immediately explained to Emily with a smug expression. Emily was extremely anxious as she looked at Han Shuo's current state. She didn't know if she should make a move against this necromancer or not. As an archmage, Emily could clearly feel the enormous evil power of the white bone staff above Han Shuo's head pouring into Han Shuo's body. Therefore, Emily really didn't dare to doubt the necromancer's words. Just as Emily was extremely anxious and didn't know what to do, the originally lifeless Han Shuo suddenly let out a shrill howl. Han Shuo's 2 arms ignited with purple and red flames. His entire body seemed to be wrapped in the purple and red flames. His face looked extremely sinister and frightening, and his entire body was filled with an extremely dangerous aura. At the same time, the necromancer who'd been extremely pleased with himself suddenly paled. His originally relaxed and proud expression abruptly faded as he yelled with extreme fear, "No, don't." Chapter 157. The white bone staff that had been hovering over Han Shuo's head had suddenly flipped over at some point, leaving Han Shuo's head and enveloping the necromancer within. The terrified necromancer continuously chanted necromancy spells in an attempt to retrieve the white bone staff, but it was a pity that he was powerless to do so. At the same time, the demon's lair edge suddenly flew out and abruptly stabbed into the necromancer's chest. Red demonic flames instantly ignited above his head, and Han Shuo suddenly sat down cross-legged. It was his turn to softly chant necromancy spells. In an extremely short amount of time, the necromancer whose head had been enveloped in red demonic flames had been burned beyond recognition. His head was like a piece of black charcoal, and his facial features were no longer discernible. A mysterious incantation sounded from Han Shuo's mouth. Han Shuo waved his hand and the white bone staff shot out a web of green light. This web of green light enveloped the necromancer's head, sucking in something like a whirlpool. A cloud of gray aura suddenly floated out of the necromancer's body. It was the same as the souls of the dead in the field, and was slowly caught in the large green net. It floated in front of Han Shuo along with the white bone staff. When it reached Han Shuo's head, the white bone staff suddenly fell into Han Shuo's hand. The green web, along with the necromancer's soul, flowed through Han Shuo's mouth, nose, eyes, and ears, bit by bit into Han Shuo's head. This series of changes left Emily dumbfounded. She had no idea what had just happened. She couldn't understand why the necromancer, who had been so proud just a moment ago, had lost his soul in an instant and been collected by Han Shuo. After the aura of the green web and the necromancer's soul flowed into Han Shuo's head through his 7 orifices, Han Shuo sat cross-legged without moving. However, his facial expression constantly changed, sometimes joyful, sometimes pained, and sometimes angry. While Han Shuo sat cross-legged without moving, Little Skull, who had been standing in place blankly, seemed to be a bit puzzled. Holding the bone dagger in his hand, he paced around the area. When Little Skull walked to the center of the altar, he actually set his eyes on the blood pool where Ansidezi had summoned the 3-eyed demon god. "Get out of there!" Emily knew that Little Skull had a mysterious connection with Han Shuo. When she saw Little Skull run to that dangerous place alone, she immediately shouted. The blood pool in the center of the evil altar was formed from the blood of the many guards and merchants here. In addition, the necromancer had added some kind of malicious substance into it. Emily was afraid that the filth in the blood pool would harm Little Skull's body after he entered. Unfortunately, Emily wasn't Han Shuo. Her words had no effect on Little Skull at all. Her shout of, "Get out of there," actually had the opposite effect. Little Skull turned around and rubbed his shiny skull. He looked at Emily with some confusion, then jumped into the blood pool. Oh, heavens, the master is crazy, and even the summoned creature is a little crazy. Emily was about to go crazy with worry and immediately cursed out loud. Although she was cursing, Emily still walked towards the altar, intending to see how she could help Little Skull. When she arrived at the altar, she immediately saw Little Skull splashing around in the blood pool, like an innocent child playing with water. His bony face actually made Emily feel a sense of joy. Oh, what's going on with this Little Skull? Seeing that Little Skull was unharmed and even seemed to be having a lot of fun, Emily was completely at a loss for words. When the corpses fell into the blood pool earlier, their flesh and blood would immediately dissolve, and their bones would also sink into the blood pool without a trace. However, Little Skull didn't seem to be affected at all after entering, which made Emily extremely flabbergasted. Thinking back to the first time she'd met Han Shuo, this little skull was immune to many dark magic and had chased after her in a frenzy, Emily couldn't help but shake her head with a wry smile. She thought to herself, "It looks like I really can't understand some things." Suddenly, Emily's long eyelashes fluttered rapidly as her eyes stared at the blood pool in confusion. When she looked closely, Emily discovered that the amount of blood in the blood pool seemed to be gradually decreasing. When Emily focused her eyes on Little Skull, she suddenly discovered that the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back seemed to be absorbing the blood in the blood pool. This strange discovery caused Emily to groan in shock. She muttered softly, "Heavens, what kind of demon did he create?" The blood in the blood pool was gradually absorbed by the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back as he played with the water. When the bottom of the blood pool could be seen, many of the white bones in the pool seemed to be affected by some kind of power and turned into bone powder that fused with the remaining blood. Then, they were absorbed by the 7 bone spurs along with the blood. This process lasted for half an hour. Everything in the blood pool was absorbed by the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back. When the blood pool was emptied, Emily discovered that the 7 bone spurs on the little skeleton's back had completely turned a demonic red, like fresh blood. They even faintly emitted a bloody glow, making them look even more terrifying and incisive. The blood pool was square in shape, and was more than 3 meters deep after everything disappeared. Little Skull was only a little more than a meter tall. At this moment he was looking at Emily from the pool, seemingly considering how to climb up. "You're out of ideas now, aren't you?" Emily huffed. She was about to let down a rope and pull Little Skull up. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Little Skull fanned the 7 blood-red bone spurs and wobbled out from the bottom of the blood pool. When he landed beside the dumbstruck Emily, Little Skull didn't even look at Emily. He fanned the 7 bone spurs again and flew to Han Shuo, who was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. "Damn it, you're just as despicable as your master." Although Little Skull didn't have any expression on his face, Emily felt that Little Skull was immensely proud of himself and couldn't help but curse out loud. Emily then saw Little Skull continue to fan the 7 bone spurs and fly around the enormous room. At first, they were wobbly, but gradually became very stable as he flew around. His speed also became faster and faster. In the end, Emily, who was chasing after him, couldn't even turn her eyes. At this moment, Han Shuo exhaled softly and suddenly said, "It's finally done." Emily was shocked and stopped looking at Little Skull. Her beautiful eyes suddenly landed on Han Shuo. Suddenly, Emily froze and looked into Han Shuo's eyes with great astonishment. For a moment, she actually forgot to ask Han Shuo what was going on. Han Shuo's eyes suddenly became exceedingly bright, as dazzling as the brightest star in the vast starry sky. They appeared so enchanting, so deep, yet also gave people a sense of unfathomable mystery. "What's wrong?" Han Shuo looked at Emily's love-struck expression and couldn't help but stand up and walk in front of Emily. He pinched Emily's delicate cheeks and asked with some confusion, "No, nothing, I just discovered that your eyes are brighter, and even your aura seems to have changed." Emily blushed a bit shyly as she pushed Han Shuo's hand away from her cheeks and stammered to Han Shuo, "Heh, so there are such additional benefits to corroding this necromancer's soul." Han Shuo laughed happily and said cheerfully, "Hurry up and tell me, just what's going on?" Emily's curiosity at this moment was enough to kill her. She suddenly reached out and grabbed Han Shuo by the neck and said fiercely, "Cough cough, all right." Pushing Emily's hands away from his neck, Han Shuo explained with a smile, "I told you before that the martial arts technique I practice is very miraculous. Not only did it strengthen my body, but it also expanded my brain. Just now, he wanted to use the soul erosion magic to take over my soul and obtain all my memories. However, during this process, due to the expansion of my brain, I was also affected by the soul erosion magic and was able to sense all the memories of his soul. Logically speaking, a necromancer of my level definitely wouldn't have the mental strength and processing speed of his brain compared to someone who'd practiced soul erosion. Then, a normal person would have their soul taken over and their memories taken over before they could even figure out his name. It's a pity that my brain has been brutally strengthened and the tenacity of my nerves isn't something he can imagine. I was faster than him and obtained all of the memories in his soul. I then took over his soul and obtained everything of him. It's that simple. Emily was flabbergasted when she heard this explanation from Han Shua's mouth. Her face was full of disbelief as she looked at Han Shua and kept shaking her head as she said lowly, "Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Just what kind of monster are you?" Han Shua hugged Emily tightly and said with a cheeky grin, all right, don't be so surprised. We can leave this place now." The demon's lair edge that was still stuck in the necromancer's chest suddenly flew up after he'd finished speaking and landed in Han Shua's hand in an instant. There was still a severed finger at the tip of the demon's lair edge. There was a space ring on the severed finger, which Han Shua unceremoniously put away. "Stinking brat, stop flying around. Get down here." Little Skull, who was still happily circling in the air, laughed and called out. Little Skull flew in front of Han Shua and suddenly stopped in front of Han Shua, waving his bone dagger as he glided in the air. He entered the blood pool and absorbed all the blood and bone powder in the blood pool into the 7 bone spurs. Emily was afraid that Han Shua didn't know what Little Skull had done when he closed his eyes and hastily explained to Han Shua. Nodding, Han Shua said with a smile, "I know, this isn't the first time he's been so daring. This isn't a big deal. Look, he can even fly now, isn't that great? I don't even know what kind of demon you've created. I discovered that he seems to have his own emotions. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but when I laughed at him for not being able to climb out of the blood pool, he immediately flew out proudly. Really, I can feel that he's really showing off in front of me, I promise." Emily looked at Little Skull and seemed to suddenly remember what had just happened. She hastily explained to Han Shua. "Heh, don't be surprised. There are too many inconceivable things in this world. I believe that what you're saying isn't an illusion because I've had the same feeling before. Right now, I'm not sure what's going on, but I think that in the future, as he continues to evolve, he'll give me an explanation." Han Shua wasn't surprised at all and pointed at Little Skull with a smile. Emily was stunned when she heard this. After a while, she looked at Little Skull with a wry smile, then looked at Han Shua and scolded, "What 2 monsters? There's nothing to be surprised about. You have to learn to adapt to everything about me. Because I think that more and more amazing things will happen to me in the future." Han Shua laughed loudly and seemed to be in a very good mood. "Brian, your growth is so fast, your future accomplishments are unimaginable. Who knows, maybe I won't be able to help you very soon. As for me, I'm just a widow. Will you abandon me in the future?" Emily looked at the current Han Shua and suddenly thought of the future. Her beautiful eyes looked at Han Shua and asked a bit strangely, "Don't be silly, I'm with you not because you can help me with anything. Even if our identities change in the future, it won't affect us at all." Han Shua looked deeply at Emily as he said this. When he saw Emily's happy expression, he pulled on Emily and said, Let's go. Let's leave this place first, we don't need to go anywhere else. I think I've already gotten what you need." The two didn't continue to linger and left hand in hand. The sky had just begun to brighten, so they took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention and left the place as stealthily as they had come. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.